Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be ranking all 12 novel adaptations from the ITV series Agatha Christie's Marple, starring both Geraldine McEwan and then later Julia McKenzie as Miss Jane Marple. My general outlook on this series is not positive. A lot of just really bizarre and totally unnecessary changes were made in pretty much every episode. Even the ones I rank towards the top of the list, I have some issues with. And I understand they had to change some things around because the BBC series Miss Marple with Joan Hickson was generally very faithful to the novels, so there was no point in just repeating everything again. But wow, these are pretty bad. There are some very strange things going on here, but fair warning, I will be spoiling both the episodes and the novels ahead. As always, I will start at the bottom with the very worst novel adaptation, which, if I'm being honest, would be in about the middle of the list if I were including the other episodes in this series, which are somehow largely even worse. But here at number 12, I have Nemesis. The story is largely unrecognizable from the novel. Yes, Mr. Raphael still sends Miss Marple to find Verity Hunt's killer and to clear his son's name, but that's basically it. Almost the entire cast of characters are different people than in the novel. There are now only two sisters who are now nuns for some reason. Everyone else on the coach tour is a completely different person than in the novel, and they are all somehow connected to Verity Hunt, which I will say I appreciate the effort made to connect all of these scattered characters together, which I do think would have been better. The problem is that it's done terribly. It's very sloppily executed, and not much effort is actually put into making it flow smoothly. Verity was supposed to join a convent, but then abruptly left it to marry Michael Raphael. Sister Clotilde murders Verity and then passes her off as a dead soldier. Then she convinces an actual soldier with amnesia that he is another person entirely and sends him off with another soldier's wife to cover her own tracks. And this is so dumb and unbelievable. It's not convincing to watch on the screen either. I spent most of the episode just wondering why everything was happening, and to top it all off, we were treated to what might be the most ridiculous death scene in the series, where Sister Clotilde kills herself in such a way that it mimics the patron of her convent. I find it very difficult to take this episode seriously, so I have to put it in last place at number 12. At number 11 is a novel adaptation that I actually think is better than the original book, which isn't really saying much, but here I have At Bertram's Hotel. I think this was a difficult one to adapt. The original plot is so bad to begin with that it has to be changed considerably. The whole train robbery nonsense is dispensed with, but the problem is what they replace it with is barely better. The hotel is now a front for artwork stolen by Nazis, and many of the guests are looking to purchase them on the black market. It sounds ridiculous, but it is actually better than the plot in the novel. It also crosses with the murder plot much better than the original. I hate this other side plot they added with these twins who commit burglaries and provide alibis for each other by pretending to be the other. It's just dumb and doesn't belong, and it uses twins, which is something I think is best avoided whenever possible. The murder plot in the novel is too thin, so it had to be expanded here, and while I'm still not a fan of it, I do think it is slightly better. Elvira is still the murderer, and she still kills Mickey Gorman for the same reasons, but the plot has changed considerably. Bridget pretends to be Elvira, while Elvira plays a sniper and shoots at her, killing Gorman in the process. This is also very overdramatic and it's kind of silly, but is still a better puzzle than in the book, I think. Bridget herself is also a totally different character. She contracted polio, so Elvira kills Mickey because she's afraid she will lose her inheritance. And if it comes out that he was her mother's first husband, and Elvira wants that money for Bridget, I wish this had been changed because the whole shenanigans of this is one of the larger problems I had with the novel, so it's a shame they kept that part when they changed so many other things. I do think some of the other changes are improvements. Lady Selena Hazy has a slightly larger role, which brings her into the action. I really like the new character of the hotel maid named Jane, who works alongside Miss Marple. I found her a breath of fresh air in the episode. Overall, I do think this is an improvement on the novel, but it's still not very good, so it comes in here at number 11. At number 10 is another adaptation that isn't really well regarded by Christie fans, and I agree, although for different reasons than most, and that is Sleeping Murder. If I'm being completely honest, I don't really mind the additional subplot of this traveling acting troupe that Helen was a member of. One of my main criticisms of the novel was the suitors of Helen not coming across as viable suspects. Here, they are members of this troupe with their wives or whoever, and they make for more believable suspects. It connects a lot of those loose ends and scattered plot points that I didn't care for from the book. Now, is this additional a good story? No, it's silly and ridiculous, but it does solve one of the problems I had with the novel. However, there are a lot of just other really strange things about this adaptation that I hate. Giles Reed is eliminated, and Gwenda is now engaged to a man named Charles, who doesn't even appear with Gwenda, and he's a complete ass. And I really liked Giles in the novel. I liked how supportive he was as a husband. Instead, he's sort of replaced by Hugh Hornbeam, who is hired to help Gwenda with her new home, and he's just an awful character. I couldn't stand him. I just didn't care at all about him falling for Gwenda. In addition, a lot of the little things I loved about the novel have been removed. We don't have Raymond West and his wife, the entire scene involving the Duchess of Malfi, and the mentions of the murderer's hands resembling monkey paws. Dr. Kennedy doesn't try to kill Gwenda. Then we have a really strange twist where we learn Helen is actually Claire Halliday, Gwenda's biological mother, and she was a jewel thief, and this is all ridiculous. And Geraldine McEwan's acting doesn't help any either. This adaptation is just a large mess, although it is this high because it does fix something from the novel. So Sleeping Murder comes in here at number 10. At number 9 is an adaptation that doesn't fix anything from the novel, but doesn't really make anything worse either, and that is They Do It with Mirrors. And for me, the best thing about this episode is that Joan Collins plays Ruth Van Rydock, and we get a lot more of her character than in the novel, but she just doesn't add much to the plot. There are considerable changes from the novel in this one, but again, they don't either improve or hurt the story. Gina is now Carrie Louise's adopted daughter, not granddaughter, and her birth mother was a famous poisoner. And I thought this was fine. It provides Mildred with more of a motive for hating Gina, and Mildred does torture Gina over this, but again, it doesn't really contribute much to the overall plot. We have a lot of attention given to the delinquent boys in this one, which I thought was a nice touch, as I thought they came across as very generic in the novel. One of them cooks the books for Lewis and then burns the record, which is a new plot that, again, just sort of met on. The late book murder is changed so that it's Johnny Restorick, Carrie Louise's ex-husband, who is killed, and not a juvenile delinquent or Alexis. It's fine. I hate the murder of Alexis in the book, and it's just clearly thrown there as padding. So I appreciate they kept it, but changed it so it wasn't so clear padding. But even then, it's still not great. I think the ending is cleaned up a bit, so it's not completely ridiculous, but the quality is still just marginally better. They Do It with Mirrors isn't as ridiculous as some of these other adaptations, but isn't very good either, so it comes in here at number 9. At number 8 is an adaptation that I would have been much higher on had it not been for one thing that I really hate and really knocks it down for me, and that is The Murder at the Vicarage. And I absolutely despise this edition of Miss Marple's former past slash love life. When she was a young woman, she had an affair with a married soldier, and I found this to be such a disgrace, and it's completely at odds with Miss Marple as a character. I can't believe they actually included this in the episode. It's insulting to Miss Marple and Agatha Christie, as Miss Marple would never do this. And to make it even worse, this has nothing to do with the plot of the episode. It's just there to be risque and mysterious and intriguing, but it's not. It's terrible. And the plot itself, I have a few problems with. I don't understand why they got rid of the Dr. Stone subplot only to replace it with something very similar. They should have just cut it completely, as it's so extraneous to the plot in the novel. The novel has a lot of these subplots that could have been cut, so I don't understand why they cut this just to replace it with basically the same thing. And this is one of the worst of those subplots. Anne Prothero is now a friend of Miss Marple, and I do like this little addition. This shows off Miss Marple's character much better because she turns Anne over to the police. Miss Marple isn't going to let anyone get away with murder, even her close friend, so I thought this was a nice addition. I think in general, this episode is a little less fun than the novel. Murder at the Vicarage is a decent episode for the series, but it's that Miss Marple love affair thing that sends it tumbling down the list to here at number 8. At number 7 is another adaptation that I thought was pretty good, except for one huge knock, and that is The Body in the Library. And I love the opening scene where the Jeffersons experience their tragedy via an air raid bombing rather than a plane crash. But we witness this happening, and it really sets this dark, tragic tone for the episode and for the characters. I think the plot is streamlined considerably, and we are with Miss Marple and the Banshees for more of the action than we are in the novel. The murder plot is largely left intact. It's presented clearly and entertainingly. The acting and writing are good, and then we get to the ending. The show changed the murderer so that Josie is no longer secretly married to Mark Gaskell, but now she is in love with Adelaide. And I'm not bothered by this lesbian relationship, but it's presented as if this relationship led to deviant behavior and murder, which is not good. This episode premiered in 2004, which is well past the point this should have been acceptable. Moreover, there is nothing that indicates this in the episode. The episode flows as if Josie and Mark are the secret couple, and then the rug is pulled out from you, and not in a good way. Miss Marple claims she figured this out because the murderers felt feminine. Well, yeah, because Josie is still involved. The fact that Adelaide is involved comes completely out of nowhere, and it isn't even well explained. I actually think this twist could have been executed well, but this wasn't it. It's the bad taste of this that propels The Body in the Library down to here at number 7. At number 6 is, and this was a bit of a kooky one, but that is A Caribbean Mystery. This is one of the few original novel adaptations with Julia McKenzie, which means that the episode is already much more grounded, and I think this one is fairly decent. I'm not a fan of the heavy voodoo elements they introduce, but it doesn't hurt it too much. It's mostly for atmospheric effect. Canon Prescott is particularly bothered by this, but we later found out that he visited a voodoo priestess, and this is really just a subplot that has nothing to do with anything. There's also a weird scene involving the real life ornithologist James Bond and Ian Fleming, and this was odd and clearly a waste of time. I hadn't mentioned this yet, but some of these episodes do have fictionalized events involving real people for no reason. But other than that, I think this is one of the stronger episodes of the series. The ending is slightly changed where Tim now tries to shoot Molly rather than poison her, which I think just makes more sense when he needs an instant death to happen. This episode aired after the Nemesis adaptation, so they cut a lot of the elements that lead into that story, which is fine. I didn't need it, but I do think it makes the novel a little special, but it doesn't harm the adaptation at all, so it comes in here at number 6. At number 5 is another largely faithful adaptation, and that is The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. This one also has Julie Mackenzie as Miss Marple, which already gives it a leg up. There weren't many changes to the story here, but it does actually weirdly take some things from the 1980 film adaptation, which starred Angela Lansbury, and I thought that was a nice touch. The plot in the novel here is very thin, as that was one of my biggest criticisms of the book. Some of the side characters are given bigger roles, which I think is necessary, as many of them came across as just obviously not the killer. Marina Gregg's character is really fleshed out here, where we have a lot of scenes with Marina working on a film, and we just get to know her better and see how she acts in different situations. The butler Giuseppe has been cut, which is fine because his murder is so nonsensical and clearly padding, and Ella's murder has been changed to make just more sense. In the books, these two deaths are very obviously padding, but in the adaptation, this is fixed. They're very well intricated into the plot. The episode made a very few changes, but what changes were made improved upon the novel quite a bit. So I have The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side here at number 5. In fourth place is an adaptation that largely improves on the novel, but not entirely, and that is The 450 from Paddington. There are quite a bit of sort of medium level changes to the plot. I feel like overall we get to know the Krakenthorpes a lot better than we do in the novel. They come across as much more distinct than in the book. I love the changes made to Dr. Quimper to make him a much more sympathetic figure. He is no longer after the Krakenthorpe money, but is legitimately in love with Emma and murders his wife so he can marry her. He's much more complex here. I enjoyed the backstory of the Krakenthorpes, where we learn more about Edmund and Edith, whose shadows linger over the family. The family actually meets Martine previously, which really adds to the suspense that she not only could be the corpse, but also the family has much stronger motive for murdering her, as they actually do know her, and they do know she plans to marry Edmund. I think there's a brilliant additional clue after Quimper poisons the family, and Alfred calls out angrily to Quimper, and the doctor is able to flip this around to make it seem like it's Alfred was calling out to him for help rather than making an accusation. I don't even mind the addition of Inspector Campbell, who is a new friend of Miss Marple and who hooks up with Lucy Islesbarrow at the end of the episode. I really enjoyed the whimsicalness of this. Lady Alice has a much larger role that I found comical. I think the ending is fantastic, where Miss Marple keeps the element of having Mrs. McGillicuddy see Dr. Quimper in the same position as when he murdered his wife, but now it takes place on a train with everyone assembled, and it's actually quite an emotional ending. The reason why I don't have this one higher on the list is because I don't like this plot point of Harold having previously raped Martine when she visited. It's very jarring and has nothing to do with the plot at all, and he's never even brought accountable for it in any manner whatsoever. It's this one scene that knocks it down here to number 4. At number 3 is one that I did consider putting lower, but it is very enjoyable, and that is A Murder is Announced. And I think this one does have more knocks than the last few I talked about. The Mrs. Swettenham slash Colonel Easterbrook love story is so silly and takes up way too much time from the episode. And this is counteracted by eliminating the love story between Edmund and Philippa, which is fine, though I did prefer that one. I also miss the presence of Bunch and her husband, the Reverend, but I do feel the murder plot is fantastic. It's largely unchanged, and Zoe Wanamaker, who plays Ariane Oliver in the Poirot series, is so good as Miss Blacklock. Miss Marple is much more active in this adaptation than in the novel, which I loved. She is active in the novel too, but here she relies less on coincidences and more on her own ingenuity. She actively discovers a lot of evidence that came to her either by accident or by the inspector telling her. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd are now younger and are clearly a couple, which I thought was a nice touch since this is more or less the situation in the book, although it's not explicitly stated. And this relationship is shown positively and not played for jokes or shocks. I think A Murder is Announced has better highs, and despite its one knock of that Mrs. Swetenham Colonel Easterbrook love story, I do think this is a superior adaptation than any other I've talked about already, so I placed A Murder is Announced here at number 3. At number 2, and I did go back and forth here, but eventually I did settle on The Moving Finger. I think this one makes only good changes to the novel. I like Jerry Burton's character more, where in the novel he was injured during the war and there was a lot of this hero worshipping going on, but here he is injured in a motorcycle crash after he drove recklessly, and now he has a bit of this adventurous sort of bad boy streak to him. I think the additional subplot of Colonel Appleton, who commits suicide after receiving a poisoned pen letter, is pretty good. The Colonel was having a same sex affair with Mr. Pye, and while there is a joke about this, it is actually taken very seriously, and I think it adds to the mystery plot well. There really is a suicide stemming from the poisoned pen letters, and this makes Mrs. Symington's murder that much more convincing as a suicide. Of course, it isn't, but it does work better here. It's now Joanna who makes Megan get her makeover, which is just infinitely better than in the novel, where Jerry just winds up degrading her the entire time and basically kidnaps her to London to get that makeover. Miss Marple is in the thick of the things from the start now, and she does a lot of deduction. I thought the novel's plot was a bit thin, but everything here is just so much more fleshed out without really resorting to cheap tricks or silly, ridiculous side plots. I think this is a fantastic adaptation, but not quite the best, so it comes in here at number 2. And now for the top spot. And this one surprised me because I don't typically think of this one very often, but at number 1, I placed A Pocket Full of Rye. This is the first episode with Julia McKenzie as Miss Marple, and the series immediately feels regrouped. Julia McKenzie is a far better Miss Marple than Geraldine McEwan, and the production aspects are more grounded and more serious. This episode has to serve as a new intro to this Miss Marple, and it does it very well. I immediately feel relief in watching the opening scenes where Miss Marple is in her home with her maids, and you just get the immediate sense of who she is. Plot-wise, the story is very faithful to the novel. Some of the minor servant characters are dispensed with, which allows for a more streamlined storytelling for those parts of the book. This Ramsbottom is also gone, and the inspector is of less importance. Miss Marple is more active in the investigation. She meets with suspects and finds evidence that was done by other characters in the novel. All of her righteous indignation over Gladys's murder is very palpable and present. I think that is the most important part of this story, and it's done expertly here. I really like the Crumps in this adaptation. They're the husband and wife servant couple with expanded roles in this episode. I think more than any other adaptation in this series, A Pocket Full of Rye both captures the essence of the original Christie and has superb production value, so I placed it at the top at number 1. And that concludes this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Next week, I will rank the remaining 11 episodes in this series, which, spoiler alert, is going to be mostly negative. These are either Miss Marple short stories or non-Marple novels that Miss Marple was thrown into, and some of these episodes are completely unrecognizable from the original Christie, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.